Here we go. So good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this International Women's Day event focused on the phenomenon of witch hunting in Scotland and in particular the events of 1697 here in Renfrewshire. Many of you are joining us live, so please put your questions or comments in the chat and they'll be addressed to the panelists after the session. I'm Liz Gardiner. I'm the acting chair of Renfrewshire Witch Hunt 1697, which is a Scottish charitable incorporated organisation emerging from the work of Paisley Development Trust, who in the early 20s commissioned Sandy Stoddart to replace the horseshoe at Maxwellton, commemorating those who died in the name of witchcraft with a new tondo inscribed, "Pain inflicted, suffering endured, injustice done." Renfrewshire Witch Hunt 1697 was established as a separate charity in 2012, aiming to research the circumstances of the events of 1697, their relevance to the present day, and to spread learning throughout Renfrewshire and beyond. The majority of those murdered in the global frenzy of witch hunting were women, although by no means all, and in fact Renfrewshire is quite unusual in that the accused were almost half and half, male and female. But on this International Women's Day of 2021, it's my honour to welcome you all to this webinar and to extend thanks to all our speakers and participants. And to kick off the proceedings, we have a song released in December 2020 by local folk band, the Collins, with court lawyer and singer Sharon Collins and musicians Mario D'Agostino on guitar and Roo Geddes on the fiddle. Performing for us live this afternoon, the Witches of Bargarren.
For the Witches of Bargarren. In the year of 1697, a signed decree of presbytery, witch trials of misogyny for Christian Shaw's possession. Supported by King James's crown, those darker days in Paisley's town, 7 souls condemned to burn as the Witches of Bargarren. Some stolen milk by a kitchen maid, childhood accusations made, then fingers point to a herbalist, 7 more to follow. From gallows steps Agnes Naismith, dying curse and rage she made, there be a hex, an oyer bairns, and a wrath in your feathers. From those who died at Gallow Hill, may the devil harm your soul through hell. The devil harm your soul through hell, for the Witches of Bargarren. For each year since that fateful day, each sorrow that befell your tune, be a hex and all your bairns, and a wrath in your poor feathers. For the pain, suffering, and the injustice done, May the devil harrow your soul to hell for the witches of Bargarren. Thank you very much. Did the
Thank
sound come through okay?
you, Julia Collins. Oh, wow, amazing, so moving and inspirational to set us off on our journey. Now it's my pleasure to introduce you to our wonderful intern from France, whose inspiration has developed and delivered this whole webinar for us. Insaf Bilbari is going to tell us the story of the Renfrewshire Witches.
Yes, hello everyone. Thank you for being here. Happy International Women's Day, and thank you, Liz, for trusting me and for allowing me to do this. I will tell you the story of the Paisley Witch Trial. The Renfrewshire Witch Hunt of 1697 that concluded in Paisley is a significant part of Scotland's national history. It was one of the last major witch trials in Scotland. Over 30 people were suspected and accused of the crime of witchcraft throughout Renfrewshire during the first 5 months of 1697. 10 were male, 20 females. 7 of them were tried, found guilty, and executed as witches in June 10th. At the request of the Presbytery of Paisley, the Scottish Privy Council set up a commission to investigate the case. 8 of the accused were subsequently summoned to appear before a second commission in Paisley. Margaret Lang, brothers John Lindsay alias the Bishop and James Lindsay alias the Curate, John Reid, Catherine Campbell, Margaret Fulton, John Lindsay of Barlock, and Agnes Naismith. They were charged with murder and tormenting a number of people, including Christian Shaw. Christian Shaw, an 11-year-old girl, was the one who started it all on 17 August 1696. She was the daughter of a local landowner, John Shaw of Bargarren. She saw one of her family's servants, Catherine Campbell, steal a drink of milk and reported it to her mother. Several witnesses heard Catherine place the curse of God 3 times upon the child, saying thrice that the devil would hurl her soul through hell. 4 days later, Christian Shaw encountered Agnes Naismith, an old woman reputed to be a witch, while playing in the yard. Later on, Shaw became violently ill with fits. She was struck dumb and exhibited various physical symptoms that to bystanders would have appeared unsettling, but these ranged from fits leading to paralysis to bodily contortion, be it her tongue being drawn over her nose or her stomach being swelling to an unnatural size. She pulled out of her mouth balls of hair, straw, gravel, and chicken feathers, among other things. Shaw's parents summoned the apothecary John White and afterwards Dr. Johnston, who bled her and attempted several treatments with no visible effect. When she finally was able to speak, she cried that Catherine Campbell and Agnes Naismith were cutting her side. Her symptoms continued, and after a month or so, she was taken to Glasgow to be treated by Dr. Brisbane, a noted physician who was unable to provide any rational explanations for Shaw's condition after all. Her family and their local parish minister concluded that she must be possessed and was being tormented by witches. There was no other explanation. The church set up a weekly fast and prayer meeting at the Bargarren house, and Shaw's father appealed to the authorities that those named by his daughter as tormenting her should be arrested. Eventually, at the end, 35 were accused. On the 10th of June, 1697, the 7 remaining condemned, John Reid, had committed suicide by hanging himself in his cell, so the 7 remaining condemned were taken from the toll booth and slowly transported up the high street and into the Gallows Green. There are numerous second-hand accounts and legends associated with this part of the story. One account of the execution states that some of the condemned were still alive when their bodies were burned, and that the executioners borrowed a walking stick from an onlooker with which to push their victims' moving limbs back into the fire. Its owner, Mark Canavan, refused to take it back after it had been in contact with the witches. One of the most enduring stories associated with this particular witch hunt is a curse laid upon the town and its people by Agnes Naismith. She went to the scaffold allegedly in a great rage, calling down the wrath of God on those who stood witness to the scene. A memorial was built at Maxwellton Cross in Paisley in 2008, the site where the witches' remains were buried. The bronze tondo with a stainless steel horseshoe embedded in it includes the inscription, "Pain inflicted, suffering endured, injustice done." It replaced the original horseshoe, marking the spot which had disappeared during the 70s. Let me say their names again. Margaret Lang, brothers John Lindsay alias the Bishop and James Lindsay alias the Curate, Catherine Campbell, Margaret Fulton, John Lindsay of Barlock, and Agnes Naismith. Pain inflicted, suffering endured, injustice done. One especially intriguing aspect of the story for us locally in Renfrewshire is the character of Christian Shaw, the 11-year-old accuser. We have a story of persecution under the auspices of the Witchcraft Act of 1563. We have the story of the Shaws, a potential manipulation of the possibly epileptic 11-year-old girl. We have the story of Christian Shaw, a local woman going on to form one of the thread businesses that later had Paisley on the map as home of the 3rd largest company in the world. That was in 1912. She and her mother, Lady Bargarren, went on to form and take to great success and acclaimed thread spinning businesses, which helped to form part of the commercial success story of Paisley. A lot of the local thread mills copied her techniques, and Paisley grew commercially from that. At Renfrewshire Witch Hunt, we want a pardon for all the accused witches under the Act. We want to bring to life the events of 1697, and we also want to tell the story of the young woman, Christian Shaw, and how she had Paisley become a world-known manufacturing center. Thank you for being here with us, and happy International Women's Day. I will leave it now for the professionals to speak.
Thank you, Insaf. So in Paisley, we have a unique story in that there is a link between the Christian Shaw, the accuser, and the thread industry, and eventually the Paisley pattern, which you can see and you all recognise. So the phenomenon of witch hunting has attracted academics from all over the world, and we're delighted to welcome Professor Liv Helene Willumsen, a Norwegian historian, Professor Emeritus, and literary critic who's been studying the phenomenon of witch hunting for many years. She's going to talk about that persecution with a focus on Norway's steel set memorial and its historic, symbolic, and educational functions. Welcome, Professor Willumsen.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon from Tromsø in Norway, and congratulations with the International Women's Day to all of you. My place here at the University of Tromsø has brought me to a sincere interest in witchcraft trials, and my interest has lasted for many, many years. I took my PhD at the University of Edinburgh in 2008 on a comparison between witchcraft trials in Scotland and Northern Norway. But my interest in witchcraft trials started in the early 1980s, born by the women's movement and its commandment to female researchers that they should lift forth women from history. And here witchcraft trials came in as a suitable area of research because the absolute majority of those accused of witchcraft were women. So I started to read court records from witchcraft trials in Finnmark, the northernmost district of Norway, where severe witchcraft trials took place in the 17th century. And I've later expanded my area of research to Scotland and Northern Europe. Persecution of alleged witches started in Europe before 1450 and lasted until about 1750, a period of well 300 years. Professor Julia Campanelli's book, The European Witch Hunt, gives a good overview of the persecution in Europe. The witch hunt started in the Western Alps in Switzerland, and characteristic for the persecution that followed were that many of the ideas that we meet during the witch hunt are related to the doctrine of demonology. It was a doctrine with ideas that related to the devil's pact, people entering a pact with the devil, participation in witches' meetings, they call it witches' Sabbaths, and also they were thought that they harmed humanity. So this demonological doctrine and the demonological ideas spread rapidly throughout Europe from the late 1400s onwards. And most famous is the book Malleus Maleficarum, The Hammer of Witches, from 1486, written by the Catholic clergyman Heinrich Kramer and introduced by a papal bull from 1494. Geographically, there was a concentration of early witch hunting in West Central Europe, particularly Switzerland and Germany. Witchcraft trials spread to Northern Europe, with the 1600s as the main century. After 1700, very few witchcraft trials took place in Europe. And the last executed person in Europe was Anna Göldi in Switzerland in 1782. The persecution of witches also spread across the Atlantic, where the Salem witch trials in Massachusetts took place 1692 to 1693. It was a late outrunner of the European witch hunt. In Salem village, 19 alleged witches were hanged, 14 women and 5 men, and many suspects were imprisoned. Both women and men were accused of witchcraft in Europe. However, the proportion of women was very high. The European average was about 80% women. During the European witch hunt, about 50,000 people were executed. The bulk of trials were held in local secular courts. Witchcraft was considered a serious crime along with murder. Witchcraft as a criminal offense came into the letter of the law, and witchcraft acts were passed in many countries. Since it was a crime impossible to prove, the accused persons had to come with confessions, and this confession became decisive for a death sentence. Severe pressure was put on accused persons in order to make them confess. Torture was used, likewise circumstantial evidence. In Scotland, the witch hunt was extreme in a European context, like Germany and Switzerland, and the Paisley witchcraft trials were part of this persecution. The possibilities of studying Scottish witchcraft trials are very good due to a comprehensive database completed in 2003 at the University of Edinburgh, the Survey of Scottish Witchcraft, a work led by Professor Julia Campanelli and with Louise Yeoman, Joyce Miller, and Lauren Martin in the research team. The Survey of Scottish Witchcraft has information on all known Scottish witchcraft trials. In Scotland, between 3,000 and 4,000 persons were accused of witchcraft during the period 1561 to 1727. The execution rate was 80%. Most trials were held in local courts, 80%, in central courts about 7%, and 12% in mixed central local courts. As for gender, 84% of the accused were women. And in order to extract confessions, torture was used and circumstantial evidence, for instance, witch pricking, where an official witch pricker traveled along the country. The confessions in these trials contained traditional ideas of witchcraft as well as learned demonological ideas. The variation of trials is seen in more intense period during some years. These very intense and concentrated periods we call witchcraft panics, and 2/3 of the witchcraft trials in Scotland were such witchcraft panics. Most of the confessions had points about the Devil's Pact and participation in witches' meetings or witches' conventions. And when an accused person confessed that she had been to a witches' convention, the interrogator always asked, "Who else did you see there?" This led to an escalation of the trials and continuation. I have worked with witchcraft trials for many years, and I would like to pose two basic and central questions to the work we are doing. First, why is it important to study witchcraft trials? Second, why is it important to build memorials to the victims of the witchcraft trials? So, why is it important to study witchcraft trials? To study witchcraft trials is a way of uncovering a part of painful history, injustice affected by a powerful apparatus. This is not a part of history that we should be proud of. It is not about victorious persons, but about victims. Still, it is significant that knowledge about the witchcraft trials is lifted to the fore in the public sphere so that it becomes visible and possible to reflect upon and talk about. With regard to knowledge of witchcraft trials and documentation, here the 17th century state helps us. They had a scribe recording all the court trials and telling about what happened in the courtrooms from the beginning of a trial and all the way through interrogation, verdict, and sentence. So they built archives. The persecution of alleged witches is a historical phenomenon covering many aspects. It deals with the role of the state authorizing persecution, the role of local courts holding trials, the role of the church and its preaching, the role of power exercised in the courtrooms, where an accused woman always was met with a wall of powerful men. It deals with fanatic ideas about the devil and his servants and the evil deeds they could perform. It deals with fear of tragic accidents, sudden sickness, and inexplicable death. But for me, most of the court records are interesting because they deal with the voices of women from the common people, voices that not often are heard in 17th century historical documents. These voices of women are possible to listen out, particularly in the confessions given during the trials. The voices of the women are of utmost importance because we are in a period of history where women from the common people did not often lift their voices in European courtrooms. Through the confessions, we get an insight in the mentality sphere. We get a glimpse into the minds of 17th century people, what they believed in, their thoughts, their imagination, how they understood the world, how they used to speak. My next question is, why is it important to build memorials to the victims of the witchcraft trials today? Witchcraft trials took place all over Europe and 400 years have passed. I would like to approach this question by referring to my own work with Stelneset Memorial in the north of Norway in Finnmark district. 91 persons were executed during the witchcraft trials there, 77 women and 14 men. They were ordinary persons brought before the local courts, sentenced to death and burned, lives that ended too early and in a frightful way. It is important to build memorials to these victims to show them respect. The work with witch memorials has to do with dignity. My contribution to Stelneset Memorial is that I have written one text to each of these 91 victims with the original court records as an outset. I've given each of the women and men a name and given them a voice. By showing them as individual human beings, they have been shown respect. However, the work with witch memorials is also a reminder, a warning. A memorial to witches is a signal to visitors that the historical phenomenon of witchcraft trials once took place. At the same time, it is a prayer that such events should not happen again. And here we stand at a paradox, because the mechanisms that we see taking place during the historical witchcraft trials, we can also see taking place today. Over the centuries, there are links to our time. What is clear to me is that the same mechanisms that were active during the witchcraft trials still can be seen today. In persecution of women due to fanatical ideas, in the result of torture, in the use of pressure over time to make persons confess. The core is fanatical ideas effectuated by powerful persons. The same mechanisms that proved efficient during witchcraft trials can be seen implemented today. Thus, on the one hand, it is important to build memorials to show what happened in former history and mark a full stop to this event. On the other hand, a memorial also has a symbolic function, establishing a bridge between the 17th century and the present. And this becomes a warning when it comes to assaults presently going on in different parts of the world. A memorial of witchcraft trials points to the nature of witchcraft persecution, centered around fanaticism in the hands of powerful persons, which still are contemporary challenges. I would like to share with you some reactions from visitors at Stalnäset Memorial in Finnmark. Since 2011, when it was opened, I've got numerous responses from visitors. There is one word they frequently use. They say that they were touched, in Norwegian, berørt. This has led me to reflect upon what is it that happens when you as a visitor meet such a dramatic event as the witchcraft trials. What is it that touches the visitors? Is it the drama, the fire, the injustice, the fear? At Stalnäset Memorial, there are two buildings made by Swiss architect Peter Zumthor. One building is long and narrow, inside like a corridor, with text panels of the 91 victims on both sides. And to get out, you have to walk through the whole corridor and observe all the names. 135-meter long corridor. The other building is a glass pavilion hosting an art installation made by Louise Bourgeois, a chair with a burning fierce fire in the middle. In the narrow building, the historical facts are presented. We see people who have lived in the villages. In the glass pavilion, there is a contrast. We see and experience violent fire, provoking anger and protest. There is a contrast between the two buildings, and the experience is touching in different ways, but both are showing and working towards very strong impressions. I would like to close by mentioning the very good work performed by Vardø Museum in Finnmark, which is responsible for showing Stalnäset Memorial to visitors. Their serious work includes the educational aspect, particularly directed towards the youth schools, pupils 12 to 14 years old. A teaching program with various activities is developed for school classes to spend a day at Stalnäset Memorial. After such a school day, young pupils have got an insight to bring with them further on in their lives, namely how dangerous fanatical ideas can be when combined with power to set such ideas out in practice. This is valuable learning for life. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you so much, Professor Willumsen, for sharing your excellent work with us and for showing us how essential it is that we continue to study and remember those who perished all those years ago. Thank you. So Renfrewshire had one of the biggest witch trials in Scotland, but it was by no means unique. There are examples of atrocities from all over Scotland. And to tell us about a couple of these, we have first of all Rae McGhee, who's Dalkeith's local historian and tour guide. And she's presenting the story of Dalkeith's witches and the installation which Dalkeith Arts were commissioned to deliver last year. Rae.
Good afternoon, everyone. I can't seem to share my screen just now. Could I be given permission to share it, please? One second, I'll try it once more. Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This afternoon, I'd like to share with you the story of Dalkeith's memorial and art installation. This is a tribute to the accused women of Dalkeith being accused of witchcraft. I'm a lecturer in social science and English subjects at Edinburgh College, a trustee on the board of One Dalkeith Development Trust, and a historian, storyteller, and tour guide. For me, every story has a beginning. And for many years, I've been doing walking tours of Dalkeith. I have Doom, Dead and Buried and Dark Deadly Dalkeith. During lockdown of 2020, I began to publish stories of Dalkeith's dark past. And I also dusted down the myriad of research I have on Dalkeith's accused witches. The fate of Dalkeith's ladies were serialised over 2 months on the One Dalkeith Facebook page. And little did I realise just how much interest and anger this was about to create. The inspiration for the art installation really began back in 2004. There's a small coastal town not far from Dalkeith called Prestonpans. It's 8 miles from the town. And about 20 years ago, an industrialist bought a title, the Baron of Preston Grange. He began to establish various arts festivals, and the Preston Grange Arts Festival retold the story of the 81 men and women of Prestonpans who were accused of witchcraft. And as such, the Baron thought it was fitting that one of the first acts he should perform was granting an absolute pardon to these 81 tragic figures. And this pardoning took place at the Baron's court session in 2004. This was very prolific in the media and began to raise a lot of local interest throughout Edinburgh and the Lothians. On Halloween 2006, I was invited to attend a ceremony which was taking place in the newly created Garden of Remembrance. And this was a tribute to the 81 accused of Prestonpans. The main facilitator was Roy Pugh, a historian and published author. A few of the guests were Helen Duncan's grandchildren. Most of you will know that Helen Duncan was a Scotswoman accused under the Ancient Witchcraft Act in 1933 and again in 1944. Helen's grandchildren wanted this accusation of witchcraft quashed. However, the Westminster Parliament did not do this. And attending this event really began my interest in trying to create something local in Dalkeith. Through storytelling and the brushstrokes of Dalkeith arts, the past was really brought to life. Post-lockdown, funding became available for many projects. One Dalkeith applied for funding for a total of 20 projects from the Supporting Communities Fund, administered by the Development Trust Association of Scotland. The idea was a tribute to honour those men and women of Dalkeith accused of witchcraft and to have their story told, really for the very first time. So the past was brought to life Through the brushstrokes of Dalkeith arts, I simply gave a context for the various trials that took place. The very exciting day for us was the 3rd of June, and that is when a contract was signed by Dalkeith Arts, and they were commissioned to produce 10 panels depicting stories of the past. Finally, it was decided that the trial and the story of 6 women from the town should be told, and also to highlight the part the local witch pricker John Kincaid played in these trials, particularly in 1661. 3 other well-known local buildings with a dark past were also commissioned. One Dalkeith and Dalkeith Arts combined, they created the beautiful visual memorial of a dark period in the town's history. One Dalkeith took possession of a building in the town centre 2 years ago. It's a typical 1970s building that you can find in any town centre, decimated by the architecture of the 1960s and 70s. It began life as a supermarket and was a furniture showroom and a bathroom warehouse as well. The idea was to insert panels into the space where windows had once been. And as you can see, the garden area around the back of this building was very unkempt, very wild. That gives you a better view of what the area was. And in the distance is Midlothian Council headquarters. Another organisation, Dalkeith Guerrilla Gardeners, were more than keen to help with this project. And this is Sharon McIntosh, one of the guerrillas, who started to clear away the bushes. She was joined by at least 10 other volunteers. Heavy machinery had to be used as well to sweep away the years of weeds and overgrown bushes. So the project was underway. This is just a glimpse of before and after, and the difference in the 2 scenes is absolutely magnificent. This project had to be delivered within a certain timeline. All monies and project completion had to take place before the 23rd of October. But Dalkeith Arts had put aside a day for the completion, and that was the 9th of October. And as that day dawned, the elements had treated us with great kindness. For the sky was blue and the sun was shining. The joiners began to pick up the completed panels and insert them into the back of the One Dalkeith building. This caused much excitement for One Dalkeith, Dalkeith Arts, the Guerrilla Gardeners and locals who didn't know much about the project at all. Our ladies of the past were finally seeing the light of the 21st century. And for us, it was a day of great celebration and great enjoyment. Here are our ladies from the past, our case studies that were chosen. We celebrate Christine Patterson, Beatrix Leslie, Janet Cock, or Cook as she's known in the 20th century, Catherine Cass, Jeanette Davidson, and Isabel Ferguson. Finally, their stories were being shared far and wide. An interpretation panel was also added to the rear of the building, and this was to give an overview of the trial dates, why and what these women were accused of, and the outcome. As you can see, we also have the 3 buildings from Dalkeith's past, 2 which are connected to the witchcraft trials. One of my favourite panels is the story of Beatrix Leslie. And down in the right-hand corner, I don't know if you can see, but is Margaret BETTICCI. Margaret is a wonderful artist and absolutely fell in love with the story of Beatrix Leslie, albeit she was very appalled. And Beatrix is very unusual in that she was well into her 80s before she was brought to court and tried for witchcraft. And she was accused of a number of things. She was a midwife in the New Battle area of the town and was very friendly with a couple, William Young and Agnes Aitchison. At BEATRIX trial, the couple testified that they were terrified of this old woman, and the friendship had irretrievably broken down. The couple claimed that they had horrific dreams and nightmares in which Beatrix was feasting on their flesh. On the night the three had argued, it was that same very night the said William Young awakened out of his sleep in a great affrightment and sweat, crying out that she, with a number of cats, was devouring him. The trial of Beatrix started in Dalkeith on the 20th of July and concluded on the 3rd of August, 1661. Several accusations were brought against this woman, and one included malefice, evil harm, and demonic witchcraft. The accusation was that 2 local girls had annoyed Beatrix, and they were killed through the use of witchcraft when a roof in the coal pit in which they worked collapsed on top of them. Beatrix suffered the humiliation of being publicly pricked by John KINCAID, and this process was supposed to find the devil's mark on her body. But not only that, another process was also employed, and that was the process of BEATRIX. This entailed the accused touching the corpse of her victim. If the body began to bleed, then the accused was most certainly a witch. And it's recorded that Beatrix victims both bled after they were touched. The evidence was indisputable. It's further alleged that the accused confessed to meeting the devil, who appeared to her in the shape of a dog. Beatrix was found guilty and publicly strangled and burned in Dalkeith High Street on the 3rd of September, 1661. And the details in this portrait are absolutely magnificent, especially the details in the hands. This is Mandy Sampson, a member of Dalkeith Arts, with her subject, Christine Patterson, and our fantastic chairperson, Mary Blair, with her subject as well. The Dalkeith Courthouse was, we understand, a key location. This is where we believe that many of witches were, many women and men were tried and found guilty of witchcraft. It's also a prison with an infamous black hole. It's important that people really appreciate and learn some of the processes that were carried out on those accused of witchcraft. And this is a panel painted by Dave Wright, another local artist. And this is John KINCAID, who is known to have taken part in hundreds, if not maybe more than 1,000 trials. More than 1,000 times, this man subjected both men and women to the public humiliation of pricking. Interestingly enough, a story reached my ears a few years ago that the instrument used for pricking was found in Dalkeith Palace. Unfortunately, I've not been able to ascertain what happened to this artefact. There is a belief that it was buried somewhere within the grounds of Dalkeith Country Park, but that has never ever been officially clarified, and I don't think it ever will. A view of our ladies taken from a great height. This is a panoramic view of them, and you can see how the panels have been inserted into the windows right round the building. Now, it's very poignant that in this picture you see various taxi cabs, for this is the taxi rank of Dalkeith as well. And the local taxi drivers are very protective towards Our Ladies, and they've taken on an unofficial ownership of the whole project. Yesterday, when I went to look at the garden, in winter time it suffered quite a bit, but Dalkeith Guerrilla Gardeners were out tidying it up, and they have plans to replant in spring and summer. One of the taxi drivers put the window down and said to me, "Oh, hello, hen, is that you taking more pictures of our women?" I said, yeah, I'm not here to vandalise them. That's all right, just as long as you can that. A lot of hard work's gone into that. So this project has created so much excitement in the community, even down to our local taxi drivers who question anyone who approaches that area. And that gives us all great satisfaction. Once the panels were in situ and put in place, Dalkeith Guerrilla Gardeners came to help out again. There was a bit fundraising and money was found to plant a beautiful garden, and I like to think it's unofficially our garden of memorial to the accused. I had a very brief conversation with a local councillor over the past week, and it's to try and establish an area within the town where, like Preston Pans, we too can create our own space to revere those who suffered so greatly and so much. And this again would involve a number of community groups, perhaps like Dalkeith Arts, like the Guerrilla Gardeners, all coming together again to create yet another space to honour the past. Because with these stories and with these paintings, the past of Dalkeith has really been brought to life. And I firmly believe that to understand the present, you need to look at the past. And never has that been so resonant as an International Women's Day, a day like today. There was also funding available to facilitate a storytelling walking tour at Halloween. Sadly, this couldn't happen because of COVID restrictions, but I didn't want to disappoint people who'd bought tickets for the event. So quite a unique thing happened. For the first time ever, I was able to offer a storytelling evening, not leaving the comfort of my own fireside, literally. And this event was very, very successful. And it took the format of live online storytelling interspersed with scenes or shots from a film that had been made of my tour of Dalkeith during the summer months. So thank you so much for listening to the brief details on our project and for listening to a story from the past that I've been able to share with you. Happy International Women's Day, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rae. Thank you for sharing the story of Dalkeith with us. And we've got another example of witch hunting, this time from Fife, where we've got Councillor Kate Stewart, who's going to tell us about Lilias Adey and the Fifers who are currently fighting to honour the memory of those condemned as witches in Fife. Kate.
Is that it? Yeah. Can you hear? Yeah. Happy International Women's Day, everybody. And thanks for inviting me along here. I want to tell the story about Lilias Adey. Her grave, and it's one of the only remnant graves in Scotland. It's just basically across the road from me. So very near and very interesting to hear what happened to Lilias. But the thing is, nobody knew about her grave. Nobody knew much about Lilias either. I've been here all my life and there was nothing to mark it or whatever. So here is my experience. And it's very different to Rae's, I have to say. along with other people, we wanted to raise awareness of the injustice to Lilith, who's a local Toryburn woman, and commemorate all the accused with a memorial. Lilith allegedly confessed to being a witch and liaising with the devil just hours after being arrested on the 29th of July, 1704. She died before being tried and quickly buried on the tide line on Toryburn shore on the 3rd of September, 1704. A grave can still be seen. It's a large sandstone, flat sandstone on the shore of Toryburn, very near. And as I say, even yet, some people don't know that that's the grave of Lily Sadie. So in 1852, curio hunters robbed her grave, taking her skull, femur bone and ribs, and then sold them on. They were last seen in 1938 at a big exhibition in Bellahouston. They actually made 2 walking sticks from the wood of the box that she was put in and gifted them to Andrew Carnegie. And they are in the Dunfermline Museum. Well, one of them is anyway, but he had an affection for these walking sticks because they were from Lilith's coffin. But as I go on to say, there was absolutely no markings of Lilith's grave, no mention of Lilith either. So that's where we thought we could do something to do, to address that. So we held a wreath laying ceremony in 2019 there, and it was a civic ceremony. I got the deputy provost to come along, a young woman, and she laid a wreath on behalf of the council. It was a really good event. We had Louise Yeoman there as well. And something Louise said to me that day stays with me. And Louise had said that 315 years to the day nearly, that Lilith was banished from that community. And that's the ceremony we had that day actually welcomed her back. So we turned that roundabout, I have to say. But I was glad that Lilith got a civic ceremony because her accusers never, so she's one up on them anyway. But the actual photos and the event, because it had been maybe a council ceremony, it went viral. I had radio interviews from Boston and all the rest there. So great interest for America, France, Australia and beyond. So following that, I spoke to my councillor colleagues, 2 males, and asked them for support, because to have a memorial, maybe a national memorial in West Fife near Lilith's grave. And they agreed, and they said they would support me. And in the meantime, Fife Council offered us a lighthouse that was currently dismantled. It was a Stevenson lighthouse, we believe. And it's in storage. It's all in bits, but it's in storage. They offered us it as a potential memorial. So it was basically an idea to get started with. So we decided to have a public meeting to consult with the community. So we did. It was quick, I have to say, and maybe we didn't present it very well, because they clearly didn't like the idea of a lighthouse on their shore. Although it doesn't have the big beacon light on it, I wouldn't have that. It's mainly just the concrete jigsaw type of bits that's left. So anyway, the council archaeologist was there with us, Douglas Spears, and he's a phenomenal knowledge about Lilith and everything goes where. But they actually turned on him as well to say, you need to do more of your homework on the lighthouse. But they just didn't like the idea of this lighthouse. So there was no visual for them, no vision at all. And we actually got, after the meeting, we got a drawing sent in, an artist's impression sent in, and it was actually nice. So, but had we had that before, we would have presented that. But during the meeting, it was quite hostile, I have to say. I think all the councillors were attacked. And me in particular, I have to say, one guy stood up with the pointed finger and said, you, I don't even know who you are. And stand up when I'm talking to you. So I did. I did. And I answered him back and said, my name's Kate, and call me that from now on. So, but anyway, undeterred, we still pressed ahead with Mark and Lilith is, you know, our demise, our story, but even just our being, even our name, because it wasn't there before. So we came up with the idea about an accused witches trail, and that was scheduled for the 5th of September 2020 there. And I know we had COVID as well, but nevertheless, we planned it and we would adjust as we were going. So we commissioned 3 bronze plaques, and one depicting Lilith's name and the image for the skull that was stolen. St Andrews University actually taken loads of photos, and we're able to, from them, able to recreate a nice soft image of Lilith. So that image is on the plaque under the dates and her name. That's the first ever. Her name's been there. And it's in direct line of where the gravestone is. It's in direct line of that. The second one is the Valleyfield Woods, the entrance to Valleyfield Woods, because that would have been the estate at the time. And Lilith, well, somebody allegedly that Lilith has claimed to have liaised with the devil at Valleyfield. That's where she used to meet him and that. So we put a plaque there, made this a wee trail. And then we put one in Couros, a small historic borough in Couros. And that small village had 32 accused, you know, of witchcraft. And they were held in the town house there, which the National Trust owns at the minute. And all these plaques are on the Pilgrim's Way, on the coastal path. And I was glad to get the services of Claire Mitchell QC to come along and open the trail, launch the trail. And it was a good day. It was a really good day. Even the sun came out for us that day. We put in all the measures that we were asked to do. But and what we've done as well is we got leaflets, and I leafleted along with other people, the villages all connected, to let them know about it, because people didn't, again, know where a grave was or anything much about this. So they wanted to come along and hear that. But 3 weeks before the event, and actually 4 days before my younger sister's funeral, I received emails from a couple of men, local men, demanding a copy of the planning permission and to supply a copy of the risk assessment because of the implications of COVID. I informed them I didn't need planning permission. Didn't go doing well. And also they scrutinised, I directed them to the events officer in the council because I had followed due process and put in the events application, outlining all the risk assessments and everything, and about what we were doing regarding COVID. And they were giving advice, because obviously getting an update because of COVID as well, of what we could do and what we couldn't do. So we followed that. So I sent them there. Anyway, they didn't like it. They didn't like it at all. And even the officer came back to me and said, who are they? But it went ahead. And as I say, it was really good, really good. Created lots of interest again. And thanks to Claire coming along and doing that for us again. She highlighted the plight of the accused, where they were, who they were, and come and hear more. And if you support us, you know, join us type of thing. So from that, the National Trust in Couros have actually got in touch with us and asked, can we move the plaque, the bronze plaque, to be nearer, you know, to be with the National Trust and nearer the townhouse where they were held. Where at first we didn't really have time to do all that, and with COVID, the National Trust, there was nobody there and things like that. So we put it across the road from the National Townhouse, but they are now going to move it onto a cairn at Countess, so right beside the townhouse. So that was a positive. But now it's good because Lilith is no longer called a witch, basically. She gets called her name. You know, people refer now to her as Lilith Erie, which is good because before you always just heard there's a witch in Toryburn. Didn't know where they were. They didn't know much about her story in that now, but there's a lot of interest there now and a lot of sympathisers with. And it's great to see that wee plaque, people are laying flowers. Men are coming along and taking photos and putting them on Facebook, you know, and saying, here's Lily's here. It's absolutely turned things round about. And there's a lot of respect now for her. And we'll keep plugging on to get a memorial for all the accused witches in Scotland. So there's my experience trying to do some good, you know. You get knocked in the process. But thank you everybody for taking the time to hear that. Okay.
Thanks so much, Kate, and well done for championing the cause as in your capacity as councillor in Fife. That is great news. And of course, we're very lucky here in Renfrewshire. We've got champions in our politicians too. And here we've got Councillor Lisa Marie Hughes, who's chair of Renfrewshire Leisure, talking about the Renfrewshire situation. Lisa Marie.
Hello everyone, and thanks Liz. I want to say thank you to everyone at Renfrewshire Witch Hunt for having me along among a panel. This is an amazing group of people and I'm delighted I get to be here. And Kate, I will be emailing you about your experiences, as well as being within my remit as cultural spokesperson for Renfrewshire and chair of Renfrewshire Leisure. This is a topic I have a real passion for, being a quite strident intersectional feminist. I think we frequently use International Women's Day to celebrate women, but I don't think we can forget that it's a day of activism and protest. And I think our work to have the persecution of these mostly women recognised, the lives recorded and their sentences pardoned, is a most worthy cause today. And I'm delighted that I get to be here to highlight that with you. I'm particularly going to focus on where we are in Renfrewshire and how we move forward. So as people who are much more knowledgeable than me have spoken about before, the Bargarren witches in their memorial currently sit at their final resting place where their ashes were interred. It sits at the junction of a busy road, and their grave is marked by a round bronze plaque with a horseshoe that bears the word "pain inflicted, suffering endured, injustice done." Like everybody else here, I'm deeply uncomfortable with recognising that injustice was done and not doing anything about it or trying to correct it, and I think our approach has to be multifaceted. Most of the people in Paisley and Renfrewshire know that the memorial is to the witches, and I think they empathise with them. But that's perhaps as much as they know, unless they've been in touch with RHW or found themselves down a Wikipedia wormhole, which I will be honest, is mostly how I found out about them to begin with. I've been really impressed with how Witches of Scotland have highlighted the lives of those persecuted, and I think we can learn a lot from that. I think all of our local campaigns could learn from what they do nationally to highlight people specifically, and I think we've heard good examples today of how that's happening already. Of course, I support their campaign to have all persecuted witches pardoned, and I think this panel is an example of the level of expertise from all different areas that we need to make sure that's done properly. And Saf asked me particularly to talk about remembrance. I think true compassionate remembrance is really important. In general, I think we find history is written by the victors, and sadly, the victors are often men, something that every one of us is fighting every single day. We've got a chance to rewrite it to honour those that didn't have a voice to tell their story, who were murdered because they didn't fit with social expectation, because they were perceived to have power, or often because they happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. The question has been posed to me a lot recently, and I often think of it. Do you think you would be the sort of person who would be challenged as being a witch if you had lived in that time? And I can see a lot of nods, because I think every one of us thinks that's probably the case. And I think that's an appalling indictment of men of the time. And I also think it's very clear from what's been spoken about today and what we see that it happens to us all the time currently as well. So we need to do everything we can to correct what's happened in the past so that we don't keep seeing it in the future. I think it's important that we recognise that witch is very much a catch-all term. It's used to sort of suit many perspectives, either positive or negative, and sometimes just factual. And also that the persecuted may have subscribed to a pagan and Wiccan life, or consider themselves to be witches, healers and seers with powers and skills, which wasn't uncommon at the time, and is also not uncommon now, and we still see it perpetuated as being a negative or a bad thing. There's a real tendency to oversimplify and suggest that people were mislabeled, and I think some were, but I think we also have to look at what the label is and what we consider it to be. And in writing them into history, we need to make sure we get it right. I think in current times, we believe that a fitting memorial marker and a moment of remembrance are basic rights, and I think that's where we begin. But we also have an opportunity to link in with education so that people grow up understanding the nuances of these awful situations. Like many elements of Scottish history, the witch trials are ones that are often touched on slightly, but often we know more about these in places like Salem because these are the ones that are talked about frequently. And I think it's time to remedy that in Paisley and across Scotland. There's an opportunity, particularly with young people, I think, to use the current resurgence of witches being represented in pop culture. I was a teenager in the 90s, and it was a decade of culture filled with the stories of witches. And we're having similar moments now in film, TV and literature. There's a real opportunity to use them to discuss the various portrayals in propaganda, because let's face it, even the ones that might be fun to watch do not portray women well. I think that international culture interest could really be harnessed to explore our own local story. So a couple of examples of what we've done recently. Renfrewshire Council has made the Paisley Witches the focus of our incredibly successful Halloween festival. It looked at different portrayals of witches. So we had, So we had aerial flying artists portraying perhaps a traditional view of what witches were, and we had people telling the stories of the various witches. I think it's a really powerful way to link people into the story, and we also had 41,000 attendees, so if you're going to try and get people on board and to learn things, why wouldn't you do it there? And I suppose one that sits under my remit more is that I chair Renfrewshire's Cultural Strategy Group. We're reviewing the cultural strategy in light of the impact of COVID and in preparation for a renovated and reimagined cultural venues coming online in 2022. Moving forward, I'm really keen that we weave the story of the Renfrewshire Witch Hunts into the strategy. I think initial community engagement is really important in understanding people's current knowledge, what we need to build in and what is of interest. We're super fortunate in Renfrewshire because we have really strong community councils, and also Paisley has a very active community trust who care passionately about their ambition for the town and making people aware of our history as much as possible. So we've already got vehicles for collaboration and work and community engagement. It's just about connecting with them. So I'm hoping that we have a slightly more positive experience than Kate initially did, because I think the will is there, but I will be taking her fighting forward with me. So for me, I guess those are all next steps. Build it into the cultural strategy, engage with our community representative groups, and engage our young people. I think that's the way forward.
Thank you so much, Councillor Hughes. We're very, very lucky to have you here in Renfrewshire. We all know that. We look forward to working with you and all that as we go forward. That's so exciting. Thanks so much for that. Now, last year, those of us in Renfrewshire who are involved in this project were made aware of an inspirational national campaign to achieve official pardons for all of those wrongly persecuted innocents from across Scotland. So it's with great pleasure that we now introduce Claire Mitchell QC and Zoe Venditozzi from the Witches of Scotland, the national campaign.
Hi, Liz.
Hi. Hello, happy International Women's Day.
Happy International Women's Day to you all. We're both absolutely delighted to be here today. and it's fantastic to see so many women coming out on International Women's Day and supporting this event. And I'm pretty excited from what I've heard about your future projects. Sounds fantastic.
There's a lot of really interesting material that we've got here. It's really fantastic, and it's great to see all these different community groups across Scotland, and there are of course lots of other groups as well that aren't here today that are working away with the stories of their own witches from their own areas. It's really great, and I just have to say, Kate, it's so nice to hear you. I love hearing you speak. You're such a firebrand. Yeah. I love that. I love the thought of that man daring to point at you and act as if he didn't know who you were. Foolish man. But it shows what we're up against, though, and it shows why it's important that we talk about this as a nation, and why we have a national coordinated approach to getting an apology and a pardon. So what I thought was, first of all, I can maybe ask you, Claire, what was it that tipped you over into starting the campaign?
So we kicked off a year ago on International Women's Day 2000. And before that, really, I had an interest in Scottish history. I had an interest in miscarriages of justice, because that's the type of law that I do. And I also had an interest in women's history and how women were treated through the ages. And I read a book called Where Are the Women by Sarah Sheridan, who you would think I'd be on commission for this book. I don't know how many hundreds of people I've told about it, but I'm not on commission. It's a brilliant book, and it reimagines the whole of Scotland if it were made reflecting women's lives and women's stories. So the statues, the street names, everything were named after women. And I read this book, and one day I was walking Princess Street Gardens when I came across I was walking Princess Street Gardens, I was looking around, reflecting on her book, thinking, where are the women? Where are the statues of the women? Where do we see women that have done great things? Where are the tributes to the women that have done fantastic things? And I thought, as I've said many times, if an alien came down in Princess Street Gardens and looked around, they would just think it was men. You wouldn't actually have a clue that women existed. And to top it all off, I got to the top of Princess Street Gardens and found a statue of a full-sized bear who had been given a statue for doing very good things in the Second World War. Wojciech the bear, he was a named bear. And I stood beside Wojciech and just looked across, and I thought, there's nothing to record all the brilliant things women have done over the ages. But then I thought, not is there something to record all the brilliant things that women have done through the ages. It doesn't even show when terrible tragedies have occurred, when people have suffered a miscarriage of justice that they paid for with their life. And I looked over at Norloch, which wasn't actually where people were killed. It was up above it in the Castle Esplanade. And I knew that there was the Witch's Well, which is a small plaque which says, some used their wisdom for good and some for bad. So it's not even a tribute to women and men who were killed. And I just stomped home at that point and wrote down what I think we need. And what I think we need is a national memorial to every single person, man and woman, that was killed in Scotland as a witch, and that national memorial should reflect also all the people that were accused of witchcraft, because your life was ruined in that way as well. I think we should have a pardon for those that we can pardon, those being the ones that were convicted. And I also think that we should have an apology for every single person. And I think that should be done. And I think, Zoe, you might be able to tell us, there's precedent for this, isn't it?
Yeah, well, there's been the case in Scotland of people that were accused and convicted of homosexual acts. That Claire obviously has got the more legal side of things, because I'm not a lawyer, but that's happened. There's also been the case of the minors that were involved in those cases. So there is a background of the Scottish Parliament issuing an apology and a pardon. So it's definitely there. And Claire knew that when she started to work on this and started to write the documentation for it. Because I presume, Claire, that when you saw that and you had that tipping point where you're thinking about representation, did your brain start to kind of think, right, well, what can I do in my line of work to make something happen?
Yeah, I was thinking, what can we do? Can we try and get their convictions overturned. And unfortunately, that can't happen because there's no living relative that has a what's called legitimate interest, albeit I think the whole of Scotland has a legitimate interest, but the courts wouldn't see it in that way. And I just don't have enough hours left in my life to try and represent 4,000 people individually to try and get their convictions overturned. So the best next thing is to ask for a pardon. And in fact, a lot of people, well, not a lot of people, but some people have said, isn't a pardon, sorry, you can hear my dogs in the background, I'm afraid they're all fired up about it as well, as you can.
They're very passionate. They're passionate animals.
Very passionate. People have said to us, well, does a pardon not mean that these people were guilty of offences? Is that what a pardon means? Well, actually, if you look at the phraseology of what is said in the pardons that were given to homosexual men, it's made absolutely clear that the people of Scotland were now saying these are things which ought never to have happened to these people. And you could simply transpose the words of that and put that in. And in relation to the minors, it was made clear that what was being granted was a collective and posthumous pardon, because it was important to reflect upon those that had died. And on International Women's Day, what I really want is I really want people to remember that these were women, not witches. And that's why I would ask everybody to consider signing the petition to the Scottish Parliament so that we can get it debated that we should have these things, a pardon, an apology and a national monument.
We're saying at the moment, we've actually just hit 2,000 signatures like in the last half an hour or so. So we're very, very pleased with that. Now, there's some people have said to us, is there a minimum amount of numbers that you have to have? It's not like that. It's really more to reflect that there's a groundswell of support for it. So we'd really like to see everybody that possibly has an interest in this signing it and sharing the information, because obviously not everybody uses social media. But one of the other things that we've really been very interested in is, and maybe this reflects more my background as an educator, is the podcasts that we do. So we have always said from the beginning that we are not experts. I mean, Claire maybe is in law, but about witches, we are not experts. So what we've had over the course of our podcast, which started off well, properly in September of last year because of the pandemic, that put us back a little bit. But when we launched, we've just approached lots of different people who are different experts or working in different aspects, maybe of the arts, that have an interest in the witches. So we've had an archaeologist, Doug Spears, who of course Kate knows really well from the Lilia Sadie case. And for my money, that's one of my favourite ones, his series, because there's so much information. And because I'm from Fife, that's really interesting to me because it's so close, and it's just such an appalling story that it's very grippy though. So even if you're talking to somebody and they're maybe not interested, or they maybe don't think it's got any relevance, as soon as you start to tell the story of Lilia Sadie, or really anybody else, any of the other witches, you can see people start to think, oh, there is a relevance to this, because the tiny little bit of criticism that some people have had has been, well, it was hundreds of years ago, let it go, like move on. You know, we've got more important things to think about. But as has been said by other speakers today and in the past, we have to recognise the past in order to move fruitfully and optimistically and with a clear heart and mind into the future. I feel that's really, really important. And we had an event yesterday, and there was talk during that about traumatic sort of echoes through time. And, you know, there is a school of thought that because this was never dealt with properly at the time, that, you know, there was naturally, those families then had children, and they had children, and they had cousins, and they had, you know, and so on and so forth. And even if you were accused and you weren't convicted, as Claire said, your life would be ruined. You know, we've come across evidence of one woman whose face was branded so that everybody would always know what she'd done. People were banished from where they lived, or there would just be gossip. There would always be talk, and people wouldn't trust people. So I think we need to clear that up and say, look, this was just nonsense. You know, things were done for a panoply of reasons. It wasn't just that they were, you know, as sometimes is a kind of a common myth, that they were wise women or they were feisty women. As Claire said yesterday, there didn't really need to be a reason. There didn't need to be a sensible reason. It could just be somebody taken against you, or it could be that you had land, or it could be that you were the wrong religion. But there was the one thing that 85% or so of the victims had was that they were women. And I think that that's the thing that we really need to be focusing on, because until we do that, I don't think we can ever have proper parity in society. Claire, would you like to say it best? I think we've got a couple of minutes left.
Yeah, I don't think I've got much more that we need to say other than that. What I'm absolutely delighted is there seems to be a huge groundswell at the same time of people all over Scotland saying we want to know about our history. I don't know about any of you guys, but I wasn't taught my history in school. I wasn't taught the history of women. I got Second World War and Cheviot sheep farming. That was my history, and I didn't know these things had happened till much later in life. I would just like to take the last minute to say I'm absolutely in awe of Liv Helene Willumsen and the work that she did. The Finnmark Memorial is absolutely beautiful.
It's so cool.
We cannot wait. There's a few things that we want to do. Julia's coming over. We want to see her when she goes to scope out her places. We want to see Kate, and we want to walk with Kate down by the foreshore and go to see where Lilias might stay. We want to come to Paisley, and very much we also want to go and see the Finnmark Memorial as well. So we cannot wait, all being well, for the pandemic to be over and for this monstrous regiment of women to unite and ensure that we get justice for the women that were killed. Thanks very much for listening to us. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Claire and Zoe. And we are just delighted to be part of this national campaign. And we hope we'll play and continue to play a big part in whatever happens going forward. And I think you're right. I think that every single woman in this webinar, had we been alive then, we would have definitely been condemned as witches. It seemed to be any woman who was powerful, who spoke her mind, would have suffered that sort of treatment. And, you know, I did find myself thinking that when our First Minister of Scotland was being subjected to 8 hours of grueling questioning, it reminded me of what happens to powerful women and how powerful women are silenced when they see that kind of treatment being meted out. So these issues are topical. Regardless of your politics, these issues are topical and need to be discussed in the 21st century every bit as much as they were then. So thank you so much for your campaign, Claire and Zoe. We're in there, we're part of it, and whatever we can do to help. And it wasn't just Scotland, and it wasn't just Europe where these phenomena occurred. We've got Julia Campanelli with us here from New York. We've heard about Salem, we know about the Salem witch trials, but Julia has been particularly fascinated by the story and the events of 1697 in Renfrewshire. Julia.
Hello and happy, am I on? Yes. Happy International Women's Day, everyone. Thank you for having me. I'm so honored to be in this group of such amazing women. And I really appreciate it. And this, just my heart swells with hearing all of these stories and everything that you're doing. So what I'm going to do is first tell you my association with the Renfrewshire Witch Hunt Trust. I met Liz and Annette 3 years ago now, 2018. I had reached out to them online and said, I'm interested in the Paisley Witch Hunt. I'm writing a screenplay about it. Can you help me? Can you point me in the right direction? Can you help me with resources? And they did. And I wrote it. And then I went over to Paisley to scout some locations and met them. And now I'm very happy to say that both of them are very good friends of mine. And we have a weekly Zoom that we've been doing since the pandemic started now, and discussing everything about it and how my project is advancing incrementally. So what I'd like to do now, a little, might be a fun experiment, is to share with everybody, to give you an idea of what filmmakers do when they have a project that they're trying to get funding for, they're trying to get interest in. And I thought I would pitch to everyone here and anyone listening, pitch to you my feature screenplay. So I'm going to share my screen with you. Oh no, not again. share. And let's see, there it is. And there we are. Nope, yep. Oh, can we get this larger? Yeah. Okay. So as an introduction, my name is Julia Campanelli. I'm an award-winning screenwriter, director, producer, and actress. My film 116 has screened in over 60 festivals worldwide, has won 27 awards, and releases in 2021. My screenplay, The Paisley Witch Trial, in both pilot and feature versions, is a finalist in Francis Ford Coppola's American Zoetrope Screenplay Competition, is shortlisted on the Blacklist, and has won 10 Best Screenplay Awards. I am also the founder of Shelter Film, a company dedicated to changing the narrative in front of and behind the camera by creating films by and about women, Blacks, Indigenous, people of color, and other underrepresented humans. I'm also the founder of Shelter Theatre Group, a not-for-profit company dedicated to diversity and inclusion on stage. I've directed and produced 13 stage productions in New York, including the critically acclaimed Macbeth on the Lower East Side. Now I'm going to ask all of you listening, if you will, just pretend for the duration of this pitch that you are executives at Creative Scotland, Creative Renfrewshire, BBC Scotland, and I am coming to you asking you for money and support for my project. And then afterwards you can tell me how I did and if you're going to give me that money. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities. Historical context. The Scottish Witchcraft Act of 1563 declared the practicing of witchcraft and consorting with the devil to be crimes punishable by death. Paisley, Scotland, 1697, was plagued by a series of morbid events: famine, sudden infant deaths, mysterious drownings, mutilations, and murder. The clergy declares it devil's work, triggering a religious frenzy. A little disclaimer: the photographs that you see in this presentation are images that are taken from obviously other produced films. This project is not as yet financed, and any actors that you see in it are not attached with this film. I just use them as examples to give the executives that I'm pitching to an idea of the tone or who I think might be good in whatever role. Synopsis. The Paisley Witch Trial is an historical horror feature in the tone of The Witch, The Exorcist, and 12 Years a Slave. Following the demonic possession of a young girl, two disenfranchised single mothers, a white midwife with an illicit past, and a formerly enslaved Black medicine woman form an uneasy bond when both are arrested for witchcraft in the true, untold story of the last witch hunt in Scotland. 11-year-old Christian Shaw has a sudden onset of bizarre seizures and claims witches are tormenting her. The church orders a witch hunt and trial. Margaret Lang is a pious, charitable midwife, devout, but not a saint. She had a child out of wedlock, a mortal sin in the eyes of the church. A woman's reputation is her only currency. Under cover of night and risking her own freedom, formerly enslaved Jael Mackenzie secretly takes enslaved Blacks to be baptized, making them free under church law. Arrested and tortured for months, Margaret and Jael discover the strength in their differences in a world they didn't ask for, but one they can't escape. James Robertson is ordered to defend the accused in trial. He's the father of Margaret's child, but hasn't seen Margaret in 15 years. Their attraction for each other hasn't diminished. The fate of all these people hangs on the testimony of one little girl who cried witch. The Paisley Witch Trial is a timely story of racial, gender, and socioeconomic inequality, religious fanaticism, and a justice system that works for the privileged few and will resonate with audiences who see the same inequalities in our society today. In 324 years, how much has really changed? Act 1, The Bewitching. The Bewitching introduces us to the morbid events in Paisley: a mutilated corpse, the sudden death of a seemingly healthy infant, a mysterious ferry boat drowning, and a 2-year famine. Paisley, Scotland, 1697, rife with religiosity steeped in superstition. Character references. Margaret Lang, a pious, charitable midwife, devout but not a saint. She had a child out of wedlock, a mortal sin in the eyes of the church. Jael Mackenzie, a formerly enslaved Black medicine woman. She secretly takes enslaved Blacks to be baptized, making them free under church law. James Robertson, a man of science, the new parish schoolmaster. He's the father of Margaret's child, but hasn't seen Margaret in 15 years. He's ordered to defend the Paisley 8, the accused. Christian Shaw, an 11-year-old girl from a wealthy family, has the sudden onset of bizarre seizures and spells, vomiting hair, feathers, pins, and hot coals, claims to be tormented by witches. The Reverend Lord Brisbane, a known authority and opponent of witchcraft, the moral and spiritual custodian of the Shire, believes everyone is guilty until proven innocent. Act 2, The Trial, the arrest, the torture, the commissioners, the jury, the advocate, the confessants, the defendants, the Paisley 8. The tone. What I'm using for the tone is actually coverage that I received from industry professionals. So I'm using their words to describe the tone and style of my screenplay. An all-encompassing, palpable atmosphere of dread. The setting and the time period are evocative and haunting, but combined with the subject matter, it creates a moody, suffocating atmosphere, reflected of the wild unpredictability of religious fervor. And that was the Bondit Media Group, or the Blacklist, excuse me. The setting is vivid, the dialogue and the character work are outstanding. The depth of the female characters and the period setting make it easy to see prestige actors regarding this as an important film. That was Bondit Media. Act 3, The Reckoning. The Paisley 8 are sentenced to death by strangulation and burning at the stake. Jael is convicted of stealing slaves and sentenced to enslavement on a Scottish plantation in the West Indies. Creator statement, and this is how a filmmaker will answer the 3 questions. Why am I telling the story? Why this story? And why is this story important now? In 1697, the dawn of the Age of Enlightenment, the belief in witches and devils was real as dictated by the church. The horrific events detailed in the Paisley Witch Trial gripped 17th century Paisley in terror and sent 8 innocent people to be burned at the stake. I first learned of the Paisley witches while researching my role for the Obie Award-winning show Sleep No More. The story of the witches fascinated me, and I thought it would make a dynamic film. I set out to write a story about the historical persecution of women, witch trials. But as I researched it, it became apparent to me that this had to include a much bigger story of Scotland's long denial of their slavery history. This story is at risk of being forgotten entirely. To this day, this shared history is only now being discussed by some academics, but not on a national level. The trauma of slavery for many Scots has never been addressed. As well, over 4,000 people were accused and over 2,700 were executed for witchcraft, 85% of them women. Their persecution was facilitated by religious fanaticism and mob rule. The accused and executed have never been exonerated. The Paisley Witch Trial will open a dialogue about shared histories, accountability, and reparations. And with dialogue, the healing process can begin for everyone, those responsible for the forced migration of Africans and those 4,000 women and men wrongly accused of witchcraft. The Paisley Witch Trial is a story of racial, gender, and socioeconomic inequality, religious fanaticism, a justice system that works for the privileged few. It will resonate with audiences who see the same inequalities in our society today. In 324 years, how much has really changed? Thank you for listening. I don't know how to get my screen back.
Thank you so much, Julia. And yes, you've got the money.
So do I get it? I would need £8 million to produce this feature. So
I think the most important thing for us here in Renfrewshire is that you plan to make the film in Renfrewshire, in Paisley, using Paisley people and actors and organisations.
And crews and locations. And because I think, sorry to interrupt, go ahead.
No, and to put Paisley on the map. And that's exactly where we've been journeying since our ambition to become UK City of Culture in 2021. And what a lucky escape we had from winning that one. Goodness me, I pity whoever it is that's Coventry, isn't it, who's City of Culture this year. But we used that whole process to our huge advantage, transforming everybody's view of what culture and regeneration mean and how we can harness those creative and cultural resources to put Paisley on the map. And I think what you're suggesting is very much part of that.
I think the best way to memorialize anyone is to make a film about them, because that will be, although this is historical fiction, because obviously I had to fictionalize the relationships between the characters to make it dramatic, to make it a good story, but it can be used as a teaching tool. It will always exist, and people can always watch it and refer to it and learn something about the history. And I think it's important to me to make it in Paisley, one, to give back to the people in Paisley who have been so kind and generous to me, but also because of the people that were the victims of these witch hunts. That's where they lived and worked and walked, and that ground absorbed all of their suffering and their blood and their ashes, literally. So I think it would be inappropriate to make it anywhere else.
And it's worth pointing out that you've already won multiple awards for the screenplay, and you're creeping ever closer to the point where you can actually come to Paisley to make the movie. So good luck with that. Now we're going to open the floor now.
Sorry, Liz, for just 1 second. Julia, we haven't been able to see your screen actually. So
you didn't see it?
Yes, I'm sorry. So maybe you can send it to us and we can share it with our audience later.
Okay. Oh my goodness, all that work I did on it. It's gorgeous pictures.
We will share it.
Okay, good.
So we're just going to open the floor to questions now. And the first thing to say is I understand that people who were trying to join the webinar had problems accessing at the start. So apologies for that. But as INSAF has just said, there will be a full recording complete with transcription and subtitles, which will be available after the event. So anybody who missed the opening and the wonderful song, you'll be able to catch that in the recording. So questions from our audience. I know one of the questions was to Sharon about whether or not, what had been her inspiration for the song. But I don't think Sharon's with us anymore, so maybe she can't ask that. Gail McGuire says, thanks to Kate for talking about Lilias. Keep up the great work and don't let the idiots get you down. Julia Egan says, where are the court records held that Liv mentioned? Are they accessible to the public? That was for Liv, for Dr. Willumsen, Professor Willumsen. You need to unmute Professor Willumsen.
Yes, I can answer this question. The court records for the Finnmark witchcraft trials I have transcribed and published both in English and in Norwegian, so that it is available as a book, and you can see the page for page, the photograph of the page, and then the text at the side. So it is called the Witchcraft Trials of Finnmark, Northern Norway. And the court records, they are preserved very well for Finnmark, and easy to read and easy to use, and they are in the regional state archives of Tromsø in Norway.
Thank you, Professor. A question from Laurie Selfridge, who says, Lisa Marie commented that if we were transported back into that time, you believe, Lisa Marie, that you would have been accused of being a witch. Why is that? Why do you believe that is the question?
Okay, that's an easy one for me. I think if you look at contemporary society and you look at the abuse that women, particularly in the public eye now, I'm in the public eye as a politician, but we have other women who are in the public eye here for other things. We experience the contemporary version of that persecution now. No one has actually suggested that I am a criminal. Well, actually, one person has suggested that I'm a criminal because councils exist, but no one has actually gone so far as to suggest that I'm a criminal and put me on trial. But I think my very pro-women, pro-equality, pro-social justice values, and the fact that I am loud and unapologetic about them would be, it's challenging to the men who currently hold up the system just now. So I can only imagine how challenging it would have been to the men who held up the system then, when women were much less able to be vocal, I suppose is how I would put it.
Absolutely. Thank you, Lisa Marie. And a question to everybody on the panel. Have you had any setbacks due to your gender? And if so, how did you overcome them? Who would like to take that one?
As Ginger Rogers, the dancer, used to say, or people would say about her, that she did everything that Fred Astaire did, but backwards and in heels. We just have to be better at what we do than anyone else to even reach the patriarchy's measure of taking up space in the world. So yes, so I'm an overachiever myself. I broke the gender record in sports, barrier in sports in the United States, in football, or soccer as we call it. So yeah, that's what I do. And I've been an advocate for women and underrepresented humans almost my entire life. So never give up.
Thanks, Julia. Anyone else? What about our QC? Have you had any gender-related barriers?
Yeah, I work in a world which is predominantly men, and in my career, I've worked, I suppose, with the majority of people being men, but now in law, there's over 50% of people at university studying law that are women. So that's a great number to have ticked off, that now more women than men are studying law. Where I think we still have difficulties in Scotland is the underrepresentation of women right at the top levels of the criminal justice system, there are still proportionally too few women in those roles. So I think if anyone didn't think that they had challenges because of their gender as a woman, they wouldn't be acknowledging fact, because I saw, I mean, just for example, I saw Scottish Widows tweeting something saying that a woman is likely to have in their bank account £100,000 less when they retire from work than a man, due to nothing than the gender imbalance, not directly related to the work they do, but on average. So in a very practical sense, that there is still a very real gender imbalance in Scotland throughout throughout Scotland. So I think we are all affected by it, some of us more subtly than others. I mean, in Kate's case, obviously not subtly at all, but she managed to put him right in his place, and I very much hope that he'll remember not to do that again in the future. But yeah, I think we all are affected by it in some ways, lesser or more.
Here. Thanks, Claire. We've got a comment from Moira Banks, who says, I think we as women need to look at the history of our own towns to see if there's been any accusations of witchcraft and highlight this. We've got, Moira also says that the contribution from all the speakers has been fantastic. I must go through Dalkeith once it's permitted to see the installation. So Say Sue O2 has commented, this webinar has been so informative and entertaining. Thank you to all the speakers. And a question, what's next on your agendas to everyone? What are we going to do next?
I'll speak up. I'm going to get my second dose of vaccine, and then as soon as Scotland opens up, I'm going to be back there scouting more locations. But I do have a request of anybody in Paisley or anyone in Scotland. If you know that you are descended from one of the Paisley witches, would you please reach out to me? I've put my email address in the chat, and it's also on the presentation, and I have apologies that you couldn't see it, but INSAF will post that with the recording.
Fantastic. For Kate, a question for Kate. Did you say, Kate, that there's a walk with plaques along the way? Is it like a pilgrim's way?
It's part of the Pilgrim's Way. It's from Toryburn on the shore up to the Valleyfield Woods entrance and through to Couros. So the plaques, the 3 plaques are on that way. Yeah.
Thanks. Gail Maguire is asking, where would I start to find the names of the accused and murdered in our own town?
I think the easiest way to start is just by Googling Survey of Scottish Witchcraft. And with that, you get a link to the database, and then you get a link to the interactive map. And within literally, 3-4 clicks of a mouse, you can be zooming in on your own area and finding out exactly. And the interactive map is brilliant because what it does is it links the places to the trials and the information known about them on the database. So within a very, very short period of time, just by Googling, you can have at your fingertips a note of all the recorded people that were accused or convicted of witches in your area.
That's great. And I think that goes for right across Europe and America. And wouldn't it be great to have a database of the whole world and where all of these events took place? We've got Rae. For Rae, a few people are asking if you've got more details on Dalkeith. Have you got a website?
Unfortunately, Dalkeith doesn't have a website dedicated to the town. There's information on the Dalkeith Arts website and also the One Dalkeith website and Facebook page. But I'll leave my email in the chat for anyone who wants to get in touch and find out a wee bit more about it. Okay, that's One Dalkeith and Dalkeith Arts websites. Thank you.
Thanks, Rae. And INSAF will put that in the subtitled recording of the session. Laurie is asking, do you believe that the women in these trials were pushed into this hysteria because they were smart or for any other reason?
One of many reasons. They were smart, they were outspoken, they had something that somebody else wanted. They were disabled, they had red hair. I mean, for any, you know, if you were a woman in the 17th century, pretty much anywhere, women did not have agency, they did not have rights. So the people with the power, the people with the money dictated, and that is not only the government, but also the church dictated how women could live their lives. And if you stepped, and it was very narrow boundaries, and if you stepped outside of your bounds, you would be called out on it. And that could lead to that could have fatal consequences, unfortunately.
It was also the case as well, there's sort of the flip side of that too, that there were some women that were of good standing, that were, you know, middle class or upper middle class. You know, we talked about the case of Grisel Jaffrey in Dundee, who was a merchant's wife, so she had status. So, and remember, of course, you know, it wasn't, you know, I hate to say what about the men's on International Women's Day, but there were 15% of the people that were accused were also men. So it could be anybody, because it was such a climate of fear and accusation. And we also have to be clear about the fact that a lot of the accusers were in fact women. So it wasn't that women were this sort of monolithic, good, pure, you know, group that were victimized. That of course happened too, but there were women that accused other women because they wanted their land, or they were jealous, or they didn't like them, or they were weird, or, you know, whatever it was. There was lots of different complex reasons. And I think the only thing that everybody had in common was that they lived in Scotland in this time period, unfortunately, which makes it possibly even worse that sometimes there didn't seem to be a good reason for it.
And also midwives were targeted quite frequently. And I think solely because men had no idea about birthing babies. They were never present at the birth, not like it is today. They knew nothing about it. I mean, they were there at the inception and that was it. So that was, I think midwifing was considered somewhat mysterious and therefore possibly magical. In terms of the Paisley witches, there were many circumstances going on at that time in history that led to this type of frenzy and this witch hunt. The Age of Enlightenment, you know, people still had one foot in superstition and one foot walking towards scientific beliefs. So it was easy to fall back on those old superstitions if something horrible was happening, and there were a lot of terrible things happening in Paisley at the time. So I think Paisley in 1696 was just ripe for something like a witch hunt, because people needed to blame everything that was happening, the death of their children, the failure of their crops, the ferry boat, you know, drowning. I mean, people need to find a cause for that. And of course, that was flamed by the church. The church maintained the belief in the devil, because without the devil, is there really need for the church? You know, so the church was as responsible for keeping witchcraft alive and well and thriving, because it was to their benefit. I mean, it was certainly to their better interests. The church was one of the wealthiest businesses in the history of the world. So it was necessary for them to preach the existence of the devil, and witches were the devil's minions, and they were collateral damage in that whole process, I think.
Thanks so much, Julia. We've got 1 minute left, and I'd like to give the last words to Professor Willumsen and to the campaign, the Scottish campaign, Claire and Zoe. So Professor Willumsen.
Yes, thank you. I would like to say that I agree very much of what many of the women today have said, that in fact, because you were a woman, then you are also very much inclined to be accused as a witch, because all these ideas, these learned ideas that influenced witchcraft trials, had as a basic fundament the belief, and they also expressed it clearly, that the women were easily tempted and that the women were inclined to the evil.
Thank you so much. And the last word to Zoe, and I'd like to know how we can carry on, how we can keep involved with the Scottish campaign. Lots of people asking that question on the chat. So if you could give us some details of how we all keep involved and keep this group network going.
Yeah, the petition's open till the 17th of March, which is St. Patrick's Day. So keep signing that, keep telling people about it. That's obviously only sort of a week and a half though. So beyond that, there's still more work to be done. We need to keep the pressure up. We need to share things. We need to make sure that we work collaboratively and collegially around Scotland, because there's lots of different groups doing things and there's some overlap between different campaigns. But I think it would be a great idea if we work together on a campaign that's on the route with a legal expert at the top of it. You know, we're doing this because we feel super passionate about it. This isn't a thing that we're making money off or, you know, anything like that. It's because we feel really strongly about it, because it's something in Scotland that we need to know about, we need to be educated about, and we need to reckon with. So I would just say, please join us, please work with us so that we can make sure we get this done, so we can move on to the next injustice that we need to fight.
Brilliant. We're in. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much to everyone on our panel, all our presenters, all our speakers, everybody out there in the wider world who's been sending questions into the chat. And we're going to play out with the music video version of the song that we had at the beginning from the Cullens. And I bet it has an even more moving resonance with us now that we've heard all of what we've heard and experienced. Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye. No sound.
Horseshoe keeps a curse upon all Paisley's tomb for the witches of Bargarren. In the year of 1697, by signed decree of presbytery, witch trials of misogyny for Christian Shaw's possession. Supported by King James's crown, those darker days in Paisley's town, 7 souls condemned to burn as the witches of Bargarren. Stolen milk by kitchen maid, a childhood accusation made, then fingers point to a herbalist, and 7 more to follow. Gallows steps Agnes Naismith, and dying cursing rage she made. There'd be a hex and all your bins, and a wrath in your forefathers. From those who died at Gallow Hill, may the devil hurl your soul to hell. The devil hurl your soul to hell for the witches of Bargarren. your tin. There be a hex and all your wind, and a rat in your four feathers. For the pain, suffering, and the injustice done, may the devil harrow your soul.